When the news broke and Julian Assange was forced out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London last week, the debates set off on the airwaves, online, and in print went to the core of what constitutes journalism. Assange's supporters denounced his arrest, as well as the prospect of his extradition to the United States as an assault on freedom of information, a potential threat for journalists around the world who expose secrets. Others maintain that WikiLeaks traffics in raw data, not news stories, that Assange does not deserve the legal protection real journalists get. In this legal case, the devil is in the details of the indictment. The fact that the U.S. Department of Justice chose not to charge Assange under the Espionage Act, as so many had predicted, but under another statute, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Look beyond the law, however, and you'll find that there is no escaping the politics of this story and the mainstream media's own role in it. Our starting point this week is London.
Julian Assange's long standoff with international authorities is finally over.
He looks like Rip Van Winkle. He has aged more than 7 years.
This is a story about WikiLeaks, journalism, and the long arm of American justice, reaching all the way into the UK and Ecuador. The issues are complex, and the mainstream media coverage leaned heavily on official talking points.
Why did you revoke the asylum of Julian Assange? What did he do?
Varios de los mismos insultos que profirió el Ecuador, inclusive manchando con heces de él las paredes de nuestro país.
Having kicked Julian Assange out of its embassy and revoked his asylum, the Ecuadorian government played on the media's appetite for the messy details, the dirty laundry.
Skateboarding in his underwear, secret meetings and scuffles with security guards.
We have to understand that the Ecuadorian government, which hosted, I can put it that way, Julian Assange at the embassy for many years, eventually turned away from him, and they needed a very good explanation as to why it did it. And as part of that explanation, they started spinning the media narrative by essentially leaking to the media these tiny details and bits of Assange's personal life, his hygiene, and many other factors.
I can't really blame the media for repeatedly using the film clip of Assange being dragged out of the embassy with his big gray beard looking like a very miserable, and failed prophet or something. And I can't blame them for, writing about how he treated his cats. That's the way the media operates. What does bother me is that they allowed the impression to spread that Assange was indicted for hacking. He was indicted for helping Chelsea Manning in general, and specifically for allegedly offering to possibly crack a password. That's not hacking.
Whether what Julian Assange did can be described as hacking or not depends on who is doing the describing. The headline in the Department of Justice's press release made its position clear. According to Assange's lawyer, though, what her client did was to try to protect his source. But the indictment specifies, does it not, that it was communications between Assange and Chelsea Manning, in which Assange is alleged to have helped Manning get the information out of the Defense Department computer system. If that's true, how problematic would that be for Assange's defense?
The point I think is important about the charges is that while the accusation is about conspiracy to commit computer crimes, or in the DOJ headline, hacking, if you look at the factual allegations, what it amounts to is a discussion about how Chelsea Manning could protect her identity while accessing material she already had access to.
Material Manning had already provided WikiLeaks, but Assange was looking for more, telling his source curious eyes never run dry. What happened next is central to this case. Manning had security concerns, fearing that if she went in for more, she would be traced. Assange suggested a different route into the system by cracking another password, thereby covering Manning's tracks. His lawyers say he was simply protecting his source. Others don't see it that way.
journalists will often tell sources to, hide their, identity by using Signal to communicate, by using Tor to access various things in terms of an internet browser. But what journalists are not trained to do, what they don't do, is they don't help crack passwords. This is where Assange crossed the line that all other journalists wouldn't do. They wouldn't try to crack that password.
For those following the WikiLeaks story, there was an assumption that any case against Assange would fall under the Espionage Act, which criminalizes the acquisition and publication of classified documents. By that standard, all the other media outlets that published the leaked material could face the same legal consequences as Assange. But by basing its case on the hacking allegation rather than the dissemination of the documents, and by filing the charges under a different law, the prosecution can argue the charges against Assange carry no implications for other news outlets. Seems to me that what they're doing by using the act in question here, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, is that the DOJ is trying to distinguish Assange from other mainstream media journalists and organizations such as the New York Times and the Washington Post, who published the information Assange and WikiLeaks furnished them with. Is that how you see this?
That is absolutely what the DOJ is attempting to do, which is to distinguish between what Julian Assange is alleged to have done in terms of his communication with Chelsea Manning and his publishing activities, which cannot be distinguished in any way, shape or form from what the New York Times, The Guardian, Der Spiegel, El País, all of these media organisations did. But if you look at the factual allegations of what they've actually accused him of, those acts are the same acts that journalists engage in all the time.
Julian Assange's time in the public eye has been tumultuous. Back in 2010, when WikiLeaks made its trove of classified documents public, it came under attack in Washington, primarily from the American right.
Now, I'm willing to prosecute anybody that led to undermining the war effort.
And would that include going after WikiLeaks?
Yes, I mean...
Since then, opposition to WikiLeaks has grown to include voices on the left. Julian Assange lost many of them over material WikiLeaks made public prior to the 2016 election, revealing emails from inside the Hillary Clinton team that damaged her campaign to the apparent benefit of Donald Trump. By the following year, Ecuador was under new leadership. Rafael Correa, the president who granted Assange asylum, was replaced by Lenin Moreno, a more conservative figure who wanted better relations with Washington. There is also the shadow of the sexual assault allegations from Assange's time in Sweden a decade ago. That case is what led him into the Ecuadorian embassy in the first place. And while the investigation was dropped 2 years ago, it remains a key argument for those who wanted Assange out and into court. However, none of that is material to the DOJ's legal case. It was always built around the Manning leaks and the question of whether what Julian Assange did was an illegal form of political activism or, in fact, journalism that served the public interest.
The accusations that he is not a journalist because he does not serve the public interest, I find them quite ridiculous. It's just impossible for journalists critical of the mainstream consensus view to contest journalists on that definition. And having journalists with access to original documents, which then allow us to see how a lot of the narratives actually spun, I think it counts as important journalistic practice.
I have complete personal disgust for Julian Assange. I will never be a fan of his. But if they had charged him under the Espionage Act for the mere receipt and publication of the materials and nothing else, I would have had to have stood behind him, if only because I don't want the government ever being the one to decide you are a journalist who's entitled to First Amendment protection and you are not.
I'm less interested in the debate about who is a journalist and who isn't than I am in the question of, was this an act of journalism that is constitutionally protected? And there's no question in my mind that Assange was engaged in a very valuable act of journalism. Some of it is a bit strange. Some of it is arguably bad journalism. But what he's being indicted for was an act of journalism that was protected by the Constitution.